everyone, welcome or welcome back. Today I wanted to do some more heads in the 100 heads challenge, and I also wanted to talk about the new gouache I've been trying out, Shinhan Designer Gouache, as well as share some updates about my brushes and what's going on with them. So we're gonna have fun, lots to talk about. But before we get into that, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Book of the Month. You guys know I adore them. I don't think there's anything quite as exciting as receiving this blue box at your door, knowing that some really great reading awaits you. It's the best feeling. If you don't know, every month Book of the Month picks a short list of the best new fiction for you to choose from, and I gotta say, they are really good at finding the good ones. I've never been let down by any of my Book of the Month picks. They've all been fantastic. Not only that, but they offer the best prices on new release hardcover fiction. So this month I chose Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. It's a literary fiction thriller that takes place on a remote island near Antarctica. I think it's stormy, there are some mysterious things going on, and I'm really excited about this one. I also chose Care and Feeding by Lori Wolliver. It's a memoir. I don't normally reach for memoirs, but this one really grabbed my attention. Lori helped write Anthony Bourdain's famous Appetites book. She worked very closely with him and Mario Batali. I have a bit of a fascination with the food world, and I'm really interested to hear a woman's perspective firsthand on what the industry is like. I like to hear about different lives that I will never live. So there's that. I'm really excited about this month's reads, and I know that if I picked any of their other picks for March, they would also be fantastic. So for March, Book of the Month is offering your first book for only $9.99 with the code CLOVER. Thank you so much, Book of the Month, for sponsoring today's video and supporting this channel. I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I do. Now let's go paint. Okay, let's get into it. So if you saw my last 100 heads video, then you'd know that I've been trying out Shinhan gouache recently, and there's a good reason for it that I will get into in a moment. I have 22 colors here, and you can see I'm filling up a new airtight palette. I'll put the color list on the screen. I'm also adding a few drops of watercolor blending medium in each well. This isn't completely necessary, but I do find it helps to keep the gouache from drying out too quickly, and I just use a toothpick to stir them up. You can also add a few drops of rubbing alcohol to your water spray bottle to help prevent mold from growing in the wells when you spray the palette. I don't really have to worry about this because I live in a pretty dry environment. So to cut to the chase, the reason I'm trying out Shinhan gouache is because Craftamo and I are coming out with a 6-month gouache subscription box, which I am so incredibly excited about. Each box is going to come with a painting tutorial by yours truly. I'll have a link down below if you want to sign up to be notified via email when they launch or when there's new information. But yes, we chose to work with Shinhan for this subscription box, and I really wanted to thoroughly test out these paints before, going ahead with them. And you can see here I am testing out the paper and the brushes and the paint, and I was just having fun doing a bunch of brush swatches here. I ended up really liking these abstract shapes and colors, and I thought, what if I did a little quick painting on top? So I did a little painting of a cat, and I actually really liked how this little doodle turned out. It's not the sort of thing I would normally do if I wasn't just, playing around. And I think it taught me to be a little more open to these spontaneous things in the studio and enjoy putting brush and paint on paper. Because sometimes a little bit of magic happens, or at the least something that you maybe wouldn't have tried otherwise. yeah, so that's how that little kitty painting turned out. Now let's get into the portraits. In my last 100 heads video, someone asked me to paint more female or feminine portraits, so that's what we're gonna do today. I did do mostly masculine portraits in the last one. And as always, I tried a few different approaches to painting the portrait. That's what this challenge is for. And I think by the end, I landed on a method that I really like. So I will talk more about that later. Okay, and just look at this big, beautiful mop brush. So here I'm using one of my absolute favorite new brushes, and it's this size 10 mop brush. It has softer bristles than my other brushes, so it really holds a lot of water, and it comes to a really nice point. It's perfect for laying down these loose initial washes in gouache, giving you these really beautiful watercolor type effects. It's also great for watercolors. It's just a gorgeous brush. Hypothetically, if you were to order all 6 months of the subscription box, you would be receiving 12 paintbrushes. And of the 12 brushes, we have 6 updated favorites from my original paintbrush set, and we have 6 completely new, fun brush sizes. And then I'm using a number 10 round brush. I picked up a mix of alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and a little burnt umber, and I'm just getting in some of the darkest details in the portrait, adding a little more cadmium red and cadmium red deep around the warmer areas, so around the hairline and in the ear. And here's one of my updated favorites. It's the 1/2 inch flat brush. We made the bristles a little bit longer, and it's really lovely to use. It holds so much paint. The differences between the original 1/2 inch brush and this one are pretty minimal, and of course I still use the original brushes from the original brush set. I still think they are fantastic brushes, and they are always going to be in the rotation for me. So one of the first things I noticed about the Shinhan gouache when testing it out is that it's very smooth and silky and not super sticky. Some of my other gouache paints, especially after, they kind of set in the palette a little bit more, they get quite sticky, and I find myself having to add a fair bit of water to make them workable. And I found with the Shinhan gouache that they are a lot less sticky. They have a really lovely texture to paint with. Of course, I'm still adding water to make them a little more loose, but yes, a really lovely consistency. Another thing I noticed with the Shinhan gouache that I really liked is that there is no binder separation with these paints. A lot of my other paints, when I open the tube and first pour it out into the palette, there's often a lot of binder that comes out as well that then needs to be stirred into the paint. And that was not a thing at all with these paints, as you probably saw when I was filling the palette. And after they've sat in the palette for a couple weeks now, there is still very minimal separation happening. Pretty much none at all. As with any brand of gouache, there are some colors that are more opaque than others. Any color that has white mixed into it, those colors are always going to be more opaque. But as a whole, I've been really happy with their coverage as well. I think this one ended up okay, but I do always feel like the first one I sit down to do always comes together a little clunkier than the rest. We sort of have to wake up our painting brain. We're accessing a part of our brain that we don't need to access when we are, going about our other daily tasks. So it makes sense that it takes a bit to get the wheels spinning, right? And there's always a moment when you first sit down to paint where you're like, do I even know how to paint? I don't know if that ever goes away, because it certainly hasn't for me. We're gonna need to ask a master painter for that one, I think. Yeah, I think this one's okay. It's good enough. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so for this second portrait, I switched back to my old gouache palette just for this one portrait so that I can more accurately compare them side by side. And I gotta say, I didn't notice a huge difference between the two. I was content painting with both palettes, which made me feel good. I always want to feel like I can switch up my mediums, my brands, and not feel like I can't paint with them. I want to be able to feel comfortable using whatever medium, whatever paint is at my disposal at the given time. But yeah, I really didn't notice a difference in quality. I didn't notice a difference in opacity. I love that the Shinhan gouache dries completely matte, and the Shinhan stays matte without looking chalky, which is fantastic. I think they just have a very great formulation, and there is a good amount of pigment in there. And you can see I'm also using a different approach with this painting. I'm doing what you'll often see me do, which is a tiling technique. And the tiling style of painting is where you basically place your paint as tiles or puzzle pieces next to one another, making slight differences in value and hue, building up your painting. Yeah, sort of like a mosaic or a puzzle. In the other portraits in this video, in the first one and in the next two, you'll see I don't do this tiling technique as much, and I do more of a buildable technique. I don't know what you'd call it. I guess where I paint more in layers, which I think is a little more common in gouache. Yeah, it is a technique I still enjoy exploring. I think it can sometimes look a little too busy, especially when I get caught up in doing too many tiny value and hue shifts. I'm probably looking at my reference a little too much, and it just feels a little stiff. In the next couple of portraits, I combined these two techniques, the tiling technique and the layered technique, by squinting at the reference and painting the larger tiles or shapes, and then layering some smaller ones on top, sort of subdividing the planes, and not getting carried away with doing too much of this. And I was really happy with how those two came out, especially the last one. And I am happy with how this one came out, but I do think there's a little too much detail and too many hard edges. And because of that, the viewer's eye doesn't really know where to land. I think in the way I paint the next two, I'm able to keep things softer and be a little more selective about where I want details, emphasis, and harder edges. Alright, for this third portrait, I did a burnt sienna underpainting, as I tend to do pretty frequently. And then I started to place some larger tiles of paint. And looking back, I probably could have been even more broad with these. I could have painted the shadow side of the portrait as one large dark mass and then broken it down. But I think you can see that I'm not making as many small hue shifts as I did in the last one. It's not quite so tiley. Today, tiley is a word. I think in that last portrait, I approached it more like I do a acrylic gouache portrait. I used to think that my approach with acrylic gouache and traditional gouache was exactly the same, and I do still think they are very close, but now that I've worked with both mediums so much, I do see that there are some slight differences. So I really focused on simplification with this one, simplifying the portrait painting process. And I enjoyed this simpler method, and I was really pleased with how it came out. So I definitely took some mental notes for the future. Okay, the final portrait for today. Stupid. This one actually ended up being my favorite, maybe more for the things I discovered while painting it than the result itself, but I do really like the result, so I don't know. I was annoyed that I forgot to press record when I did the burnt sienna underpainting, but I'm glad I caught it when I did, because you can see I just covered the entire shape of the head with that burnt sienna base. I didn't really do anything fancy there, it's just a watered down burnt sienna. And then to loosely sketch in the details of the portrait, I used a watered down mix of alizarin crimson and burnt umber. Ooh, something that was really fun about this one is that I used some different color mixes than I normally do. Usually to mix a chromatic black, I use ultramarine blue and burnt umber. I've talked about this before, I don't usually use black from the tube, But in this one, I mixed Viridian and alizarin crimson to make my darkest dark, or my chromatic black. And there are many ways to mix a chromatic black. You can use equal parts red, blue, and yellow, or you can mix complementary colors like I did with the Viridian green and alizarin crimson. As long as there is no PW6 or titanium white in any of the colors, you're going to be able to get a black. If there is white, then you're going to get more of a gray, which sometimes you want. I chose the Viridian and alizarin mix because I felt like there was a bit of a green cast in the photo that seems to be reflecting from below her, and so I wanted to include some Viridian in my color mixes. Mixing my black this way just made the color palette feel a little more harmonious, I think. But yes, I tried to stick to a smaller color palette with this one, and I really liked it. I tried to keep things super loose. I wanted my brushwork to be a little looser. I think that was one of my problems with the second portrait, was that it was a little tight. And for this one, I once again used that more layered approach by painting larger tiles and then placing some smaller ones on top. But yeah, let me know what you think, which portrait is your favorite. It's totally fine if it's the second one. I do like a lot of things about that one. But when it comes to this challenge, I'm feeling a little bit like a mad scientist. I'm trying to dissect everything and figure out how I like to paint and, you know, what things work and don't work for me. So I'm a little crazy. Now that I've told you I'm crazy, which one's your favorite? Seriously. As you can probably tell, these 100 Heads videos aren't really tutorials, though I do try to share my thoughts, some things I learn along the way while I'm painting, and I try to share helpful tips. But if you are interested in gouache painting tutorials, something more step-by-step, I highly recommend checking out the gouache subscription boxes that Craftamo and I are coming out with. Like I said, the link will be down below if you want to sign up for email notifications. We don't have an exact launch date set just yet, but we're working on it. Also, stay tuned here and on my Instagram. I will definitely keep you guys posted. So that's gonna be it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. A big thank you to Book of the Month. We love reading here on the Emily Hughes channel. And thank you as well to my wonderful channel members and patrons over on Patreon. Your support makes these videos possible, so thank you so much. Remember to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you want to see more like this, then make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. What are you waiting for? The button is right there. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye.